Who am I to judge? These 5 words, spoken by Pope Francis in 2013 during an impromptu press conference on a flight returning from Brazil, sent shockwaves through the Catholic world and beyond. For LGBTQIA+ Catholics across America who had grown accustomed to feeling unwelcome in their spiritual home, it was as if a window had suddenly been thrown open, allowing fresh air into a room that had been sealed for centuries. Today, as we mourn the passing of Pope Francis, we reflect on how those simple words marked the beginning of a revolutionary shift in the Catholic Church's approach to LGBTQIA+ individuals, a shift that would culminate 10 years later in the historic decision to allow blessings for same-sex couples, a development that many once thought impossible. Today, we're exploring how Pope Francis created a space for LGBTQIA+ Catholics to reconcile their faith with their identities, a reconciliation that many of you watching have yearned for throughout your lives. Imagine growing up in a Catholic household in Middle America, attending Mass every Sunday, learning about God's infinite love, only to be told, explicitly or implicitly, that this love somehow didn't fully extend to you because of who you love or how you identify. For decades, this has been the painful reality for countless LGBTQIA+ Catholics across the United States. But what if there was another way to understand your relationship with God? What if the highest authority in the Catholic Church suggested that your sexual orientation or gender identity wasn't the defining factor in your relationship with the divine? In this video, we'll journey through the transformative impact of Pope Francis's papacy on LGBTQIA+ Catholics in America, from bustling urban parishes in New York and San Francisco to small-town communities in the heartland. We'll explore how his words and actions created ripples of change that touched individual lives, transformed communities, and challenged long-held assumptions about the intersection of faith and identity. Have you ever felt torn between your authentic self and your spiritual beliefs? Have you wondered if it's possible to be fully embraced by a faith tradition that has historically excluded people like you? These questions lie at the heart of our exploration today. Through personal stories, theological insights, and a compassionate examination of Francis's legacy, we'll discover how his papacy offered a revolutionary vision of a church that prioritizes pastoral care over rigid doctrine. A church where, in Francis's own words, the doors are open to everyone. We'll meet Michael Sennett, a transgender Catholic from Boston, who shared the joy of being a transgender Catholic person with Pope Francis during a private Vatican meeting. We'll hear from couples like Damien and Jason Steidel-Jack, who received a blessing from a Jesuit priest following the Vatican's groundbreaking Fiducia Supplicans document. And we'll explore the work of Sister Jeanine Gramick, who after decades of Vatican criticism, received papal validation when Francis called her a brave woman who makes her decisions in prayer. These stories aren't just isolated incidents. They represent a fundamental shift in how the Catholic Church engages with LGBTQIA+ individuals. A shift from judgment to accompaniment, from exclusion to invitation, from condemnation to conversation. This isn't to say that Pope Francis changed Catholic doctrine on sexuality or marriage. He didn't. But what he did was perhaps more revolutionary. He changed the tone, the approach, and the priority. He reminded the Church and the world that before any theological discussion about sexuality or gender, there must first be an acknowledgement of the inherent dignity of every human being. People must be accompanied as Jesus accompanied, Francis insisted. When a person who has this condition comes before Jesus, Jesus will surely not say, "Go away because you're homosexual." This emphasis on accompaniment rather than judgment opened new possibilities for LGBTQIA+ Catholics to find their place within the Church. As we explore these developments, we invite you to reflect on your own spiritual journey. Where have you found acceptance? Where have you encountered barriers? And how might Pope Francis's legacy offer a new path forward for those seeking to integrate their faith and identity? In the next hour, we'll delve deeper into specific moments that defined Francis's approach to LGBTQIA+ issues, examine the theological underpinnings of his inclusive vision, and consider what his legacy means for the future of Catholicism in America. We'll explore how his papacy created space for a more nuanced, compassionate understanding of human sexuality within a tradition that has often struggled to address these issues with sensitivity. Join us as we explore how Pope Francis's revolution of tenderness created new possibilities for LGBTQIA+ Catholics seeking to reconcile their faith and identity, and what his passing means for those who found hope in his words. God made you like this and loves you like this. The journey of Pope Francis's revolutionary approach to LGBTQIA+ Catholics began long before he ascended to the papacy. Born Jorge Mario Bergoglio in Buenos Aires, Argentina, Francis witnessed firsthand the struggles of marginalized communities. As Archbishop of Buenos Aires, he was known to visit AIDS patients when many religious leaders wouldn't dare enter their hospital rooms. While he upheld traditional Catholic teaching on marriage, he supported civil unions as a way to provide legal protections for same-sex couples in Argentina, a position that hinted at the pragmatic compassion that would later define his papacy. When white smoke billowed from the Sistine Chapel in March 2013, few could have predicted how this new pope would transform the Church's relationship with LGBTQIA+ individuals. The Catholic Church in America was, at that time, deeply entrenched in culture wars. Many bishops were focused on opposing same-sex marriage legislation, and LGBTQIA+ Catholics often felt they had to choose between their faith and their identity. Enter Francis, who in his first major interview as Pope signaled a dramatic shift in tone. We cannot insist only on issues related to abortion, gay marriage, and the use of contraceptive methods. This is not possible, he said. The teaching of the Church is clear, and I am a son of the Church, but it is not necessary to talk about these issues all the time. This statement sent shockwaves through American Catholic parishes. In churches where homilies had frequently condemned homosexuality, priests began to reconsider their approach. In Catholic universities across the country, LGBTQIA+ student groups that had operated in the shadows felt emboldened to seek official recognition. Consider the experience of James, a gay Catholic student at Notre Dame University. Before Francis, our LGBTQIA+ group wasn't even allowed to meet on campus, he recalls. After his "Who am I to judge" comment, the administration suddenly became more open to dialogue. It wasn't an overnight transformation, but it felt like someone had finally cracked open a door that had been sealed shut. This opening of doors became literal in many American parishes. In Chicago, Father Michael Pfleger invited LGBTQIA+ Catholics who had felt unwelcome in other churches to join his congregation at St. Sabina. In San Francisco, Most Holy Redeemer Parish in the Castro district strengthened its ministry to LGBTQIA+ Catholics, emboldened by the Pope's emphasis on mercy and accompaniment. But perhaps the most profound impact was felt in small-town America, where LGBTQIA+ Catholics had often lived in isolation, believing they were alone in their struggle to reconcile faith and identity. In Owensboro, Kentucky, a group of Catholic parents with LGBTQIA+ children began meeting monthly for prayer and support. They called themselves Fortunate Families, inspired by Francis's emphasis on family accompaniment. Before Pope Francis, we felt like we had to choose between our church and our children, explains Maria, whose transgender son had left the church after years of feeling rejected. Francis gave us permission to love our children fully without feeling like we were betraying our faith. This sentiment, that Francis gave Catholics permission to embrace LGBTQIA+ individuals without abandoning their faith, echoes across countless American stories. It reflects the Pope's genius in creating space for inclusion without explicitly changing doctrine. Consider Francis's approach to transgender Catholics, a community that had received particularly harsh treatment from church authorities. In 2015, reports emerged that Francis had met privately with a Spanish transgender man, Diego Neria Lejaraga, who had written to the Pope after being rejected by his local parish. According to Lejaraga, Francis embraced him and told him, "God loves all his children, however they are." This meeting inspired American transgender Catholics like Nicole Santamaria from Maryland to reconnect with their faith. When I heard about the Pope meeting with a transgender man, I wept, Santamaria shares. For the first time, I felt like maybe there was a place for me in the church after all. Francis's approach represented a fundamental shift in emphasis, from doctrinal purity to pastoral accompaniment. This shift was perhaps best articulated in his apostolic exhortation, Amoris Laetitia, the joy of love, where he wrote, "We need to acknowledge the great variety of family situations that can offer a certain stability, but de facto or same-sex unions, for example, may not simply be equated with marriage. No union that is temporary or closed to the transmission of life can ensure the future of society." Yet in the same document he emphasized, every person, regardless of sexual orientation, ought to be respected in his or her dignity and treated with consideration. This both and approach, upholding traditional teaching while emphasizing dignity and respect, created space for American Catholics to engage with LGBTQIA+ issues in more nuanced ways. It allowed priests like Father James Martin, S.J., to emerge as bridge builders between the Church and LGBTQIA+ Catholics. Martin, whose book Building a Bridge called for respectful dialogue between the Catholic Church and LGBTQIA+ community, found in Francis a kindred spirit. When conservative Catholics criticized Martin's ministry, Francis responded by granting him a private audience, a clear sign of papal support that emboldened Martin and other American priests to continue their outreach to LGBTQIA+ Catholics. What Pope Francis did was change the conversation, explains Martin. He didn't change the catechism, but he changed how we talk about LGBTQ people. He reminded us that they are not abstract categories, but real people deserving of respect, compassion, and sensitivity. This change in conversation had tangible effects across American Catholic institutions. Catholic hospitals began developing more sensitive protocols for treating transgender patients. Catholic schools revised their approaches to supporting LGBTQIA+ students. Catholic charities organizations in several dioceses reaffirmed their commitment to serving all people regardless of sexual orientation or gender identity. At Loyola University Chicago, a Jesuit institution, administrators cited Francis's approach as inspiration for expanding resources for LGBTQIA+ students. Pope Francis calls us to create a culture of encounter, explained the university's president. That means creating spaces where all students, including those who identify as LGBTQ, can flourish academically, socially, and spiritually. Even in more conservative dioceses, Francis's influence could be felt. While some bishops maintained strict prohibitions against LGBTQIA+ ministry, others began quiet initiatives to ensure LGBTQIA+ Catholics didn't feel completely alienated. In the Archdiocese of Denver, known for its conservative stance, a group of parents of LGBTQIA+ children began meeting with their bishop's knowledge, if not his explicit endorsement. "We're not challenging church teaching," explained one mother. "We're just trying to make sure our children know they're loved by God and have a place in the church." Pope Francis gave us the courage to start these conversations. Perhaps most significantly, Francis's approach created space for LGBTQIA+ Catholics themselves to reclaim their place in the church without feeling they had to deny their identities. Organizations like Dignity USA, which had often operated independently of official church structures, found new opportunities for dialogue with sympathetic clergy and bishops. For Michael Sennett, the transgender Catholic from Boston who would eventually meet Francis at the Vatican, the Pope's approach was life-changing. "I had left the church because I couldn't reconcile my faith with my identity," he recalls. Francis's words about God loving us as we are brought me back. "For the first time I felt like maybe I didn't have to choose between being Catholic and being transgender." This sentiment, that Francis made it possible to be both authentically Catholic and authentically LGBTQIA+, represents perhaps his most revolutionary contribution to American Catholic life. By emphasizing that God's love transcends categories and conditions, Francis offered LGBTQIA+ Catholics a theological framework for understanding their place in the Church that didn't require them to deny their lived experience. The watershed moment in Francis's relationship with LGBTQIA+ Catholics came in December 2023. when the Vatican released Fiducia Supplicans, a declaration that formally permitted priests to offer blessings to same-sex couples. While the document carefully distinguished these blessings from marriage and emphasized they should not be confused with the sacrament, the practical effect was revolutionary. For the first time, the Catholic Church officially recognized that same-sex relationships could be worthy of God's blessing. The impact across American parishes was immediate and profound. In Washington, D.C., Holy Trinity Catholic Church, a Jesuit parish, quickly announced it would offer blessings to same-sex couples. "We have always sought to be a welcoming parish where all may encounter the love of Christ," the parish stated. This declaration allows us to more fully extend that welcome to our LGBTQ parishioners. For couples like Damien and Jason Steidel-Jack, who had maintained their Catholic faith despite feeling marginalized, the declaration was deeply affirming. "We've been together for 12 years, and we've never left the church despite the pain we've sometimes felt," Damien explains. To receive a blessing from our priest in our parish, surrounded by our community, it felt like coming home after a long exile. The blessing ceremony itself was simple but profound. Their priest, Father Kevin O'Brien, placed his hands on their shoulders and prayed, "May God continue to pour forth grace upon you, that you might experience the divine presence in your lives and respond generously to God's call." "It wasn't a wedding," Jason clarifies. "We were already married civilly. But having our relationship acknowledged as something good, something worthy of God's blessing, that meant everything to us as Catholics." Not all American dioceses embraced Fiducia Supplicans with equal enthusiasm. In some more conservative regions, bishops issued statements restricting or prohibiting such blessings. This created a patchwork of practices across the country, with LGBTQIA+ Catholics in some areas enjoying newfound acceptance, while others continued to face exclusion. This tension reflected the broader reality of Francis's papacy. His revolution was real but incomplete, contested and embraced in varying degrees across the diverse landscape of American Catholicism. Yet even in dioceses where bishops restricted blessings, Francis's influence created space for quiet acts of pastoral accompaniment. In one Midwestern diocese where the bishop had prohibited blessings for same-sex couples, a priest met privately with a lesbian couple who had been together for 20 years. "I can't do this publicly," he told them, "but I can pray with you and ask God's blessing on your commitment to each other." This kind of underground pastoral care became increasingly common in more conservative dioceses, a direct result of Francis's emphasis on mercy over rigid application of rules. Beyond the headline-grabbing issue of blessings, Francis's papacy saw other significant developments in the Church's relationship with LGBTQIA+ Catholics. His correspondence with Sister Jeanine Gramick, co-founder of New Ways Ministry, represented a particularly powerful reversal of previous Vatican positions. Gramick had been ministering to LGBTQIA+ Catholics since the 1970s, often facing opposition from church authorities. In 1999, the Vatican's Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, then headed by Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger, later Pope Benedict XVI, ordered her to stop her ministry. For decades, she continued her work under a cloud of official disapproval. Francis changed that dramatically. In a handwritten letter to Gramick in 2021, he praised her as a valiant woman who had suffered much for her ministry. "Thank you for all your closeness, compassion, and tenderness," he wrote. This papal affirmation transformed Gramick's status from that of a marginalized figure to a recognized pioneer of Catholic outreach to LGBTQIA+ individuals. Pope Francis understood what we've been trying to do all these years, Gramick reflects. "We're not challenging doctrine. We're trying to help LGBTQ Catholics know they are loved by God and have a place in the Church." Francis got that in a way his predecessors didn't. This validation of Gramick's ministry had ripple effects across American Catholicism. Priests who had been hesitant to engage in LGBTQIA+ ministry for fear of ecclesiastical repercussions felt newly empowered. Catholic colleges and universities expanded their LGBTQIA+ outreach programs. Even some bishops, who had previously been silent on LGBTQIA+ issues, began speaking about the need for respect and inclusion. Francis's impact extended beyond institutional changes to touch individual lives in profound ways. Consider the experience of Elena, a lesbian Catholic from Miami whose devoutly Catholic parents had rejected her when she came out. "My mother wouldn't even speak to me for 2 years," Elena recalls. "Then one day she called me in tears. She had read about Pope Francis saying parents shouldn't reject their gay children. If the Pope can accept you," she told me, "then I need to accept you too." We're still rebuilding our relationship, but Francis gave us a place to start. Stories like Elena's multiplied across America, as Francis's words gave Catholic parents permission to love and accept their LGBTQIA+ children without feeling they were betraying their faith. Support groups for Catholic parents of LGBTQIA+ children flourished, often citing Francis's teachings on family and mercy. For transgender Catholics, Francis's papacy brought particularly significant developments. While the Vatican under Francis did issue some documents expressing concerns about gender ideology, the Pope himself consistently emphasized the dignity of transgender individuals and their right to pastoral care. Michael Sennett's meeting with Francis at the Vatican exemplified this approach. After sharing his experience as a transgender Catholic, Sennett recalls, "The Pope looked at me with such kindness and said, 'God loves you like this. The Church loves you like this.' It wasn't about whether he agreed with every aspect of my transition. It was about affirming my fundamental dignity as a child of God." This affirmation of dignity had practical effects in American Catholic institutions. Several Catholic hospitals revised their protocols for treating transgender patients, emphasizing respect for their identities while navigating complex ethical questions about certain medical interventions. Catholic schools developed more nuanced approaches to supporting transgender students, focusing on preventing bullying and ensuring all students felt safe and respected. At DePaul University in Chicago, administrators cited Francis's emphasis on accompaniment when developing protocols for supporting transgender students. "We're guided by our Catholic, Vincentian values of human dignity and compassion," explained the university's president. Pope Francis reminds us that these values must extend to all members of our community, including those who are transgender. Francis's revolution extended beyond specific policies to encompass a broader shift in Catholic culture. By repeatedly emphasizing that God's mercy and love extend to all people, regardless of sexual orientation or gender identity, he created space for LGBTQIA+ Catholics to reclaim their spiritual heritage without feeling they had to deny their authentic selves. This cultural shift was perhaps most visible in the changing language used to discuss LGBTQIA+ issues in Catholic contexts, where previous church documents had referred to homosexual tendencies or objectively disordered inclinations. Francis spoke of LGBTQIA+ people as beloved children of God with gifts to offer the Church. "Language matters," explains Father Brian Massingale, a gay priest and theologian at Fordham University. When the Pope uses respectful language to talk about LGBTQ people, it changes how Catholics in the pews think about these issues. It makes it harder to demonize or exclude people when the Pope himself speaks of them with respect and compassion. This shift in language and tone created new possibilities for dialogue across the often polarized landscape of American Catholicism. Even Catholics who maintained traditional views on sexuality found in Francis's approach an invitation to engage with LGBTQIA+ individuals as people, rather than as abstract categories or political symbols. As one conservative Catholic mother in Texas explained, "I still believe what the Church teaches about marriage, but Francis helped me see that my son's dignity as a gay man isn't up for debate. I can love him completely while still being faithful to my beliefs. Francis gave me permission to put relationship before ideology." Perhaps the most revolutionary aspect of Francis's approach to LGBTQIA+ issues was his willingness to challenge the hypocrisy he perceived in how the Church sometimes applied its moral teachings. In a 2023 interview that sent shockwaves through conservative Catholic circles, Francis directly addressed critics of his decision to allow blessings for same-sex couples. "Those who protest vehemently against these blessings are people who are scandalized if I give a blessing to a homosexual," he observed. These same people are not scandalized when I give a blessing to an entrepreneur who perhaps exploits people. And this is a very serious sin. They are not scandalized if I give a blessing to someone who uses slave labor. This pointed critique cut to the heart of a long-standing frustration among LGBTQIA+ Catholics. The perception that sexual ethics were enforced with particular rigor, while other moral teachings, especially those concerning economic justice, received less emphasis. By naming this inconsistency, Francis challenged American Catholics to examine their own selective application of church teaching. For LGBTQIA+ Catholics, who had long felt unfairly singled out, Francis's words were profoundly validating. "I printed out that quote and put it on my refrigerator," says Thomas, a gay Catholic from Atlanta. "For years, I watched wealthy parishioners who treated their workers terribly receive communion without question, while I was told my relationship made me unworthy." Francis named that double standard, and it felt like someone was finally seeing the injustice I'd experienced. Francis's willingness to name and challenge hypocrisy extended beyond specific statements to encompass a broader critique of legalism in Catholic life. Throughout his papacy, he repeatedly warned against a faith reduced to rigid rule-following, emphasizing instead the primacy of conscience and the centrality of mercy to the gospel message. This emphasis on conscience proved particularly significant for LGBTQIA+ Catholics navigating complex moral questions. In Amoris Laetitia, Francis wrote, "We have been called to form consciences, not to replace them." This affirmation of conscience, a traditional Catholic teaching that had sometimes been downplayed in recent decades, offered LGBTQIA+ Catholics a framework for discerning their path forward. For David, a gay Catholic teacher at a Catholic high school in California, this emphasis on conscience proved liberating. "I'd spent years in confession being told different things by different priests about my relationship," he explains. "Francis's teaching on conscience helped me realize that I needed to prayerfully discern my path rather than just following rules. That doesn't mean anything goes. It means taking seriously my responsibility before God to form my conscience and act accordingly." This renewed emphasis on conscience coincided with Francis's broader effort to decentralize church authority, an approach that had significant implications for how LGBTQIA+ ministry developed across diverse American contexts. Rather than imposing uniform policies from Rome, Francis repeatedly emphasized the importance of local discernment and cultural sensitivity. "The Church's understanding has developed over the centuries," Francis noted in a 2023 interview. "When you study the history of the Church, you see that every region has its own development according to the culture of the people. This openness to cultural adaptation created space for American Catholics to develop approaches to LGBTQIA+ ministry that responded to their specific context, a context where civil same-sex marriage was legal and where LGBTQIA+ individuals enjoyed increasing social acceptance. In practice, this meant that Catholic parishes in urban centers like San Francisco, New York, and Chicago could develop robust LGBTQIA+ outreach programs, while more conservative regions moved at a different pace. Rather than seeing this diversity as problematic, Francis's approach suggested it was a natural expression of how the Church engages with different cultural realities. The impact of this decentralized approach was evident in the diverse ways American Catholic institutions responded to Francis's papacy. At Jesuit universities like Georgetown and Fordham, LGBTQIA+ resource centers expanded their programming and received increased institutional support. In more conservative Catholic colleges, changes were more subtle but still significant, often taking the form of enhanced anti-bullying policies or more inclusive language in campus ministry. For LGBTQIA+ Catholic students, these institutional changes made a tangible difference in their daily lives. "When I started college, the Catholic campus ministry had a reputation for being unwelcoming to LGBTQ students," recalls Sophia, a bisexual student at a Catholic university in the Midwest. "By my senior year, they were hosting dialogue sessions about sexuality and faith, and the chaplain made a point of saying all students were welcome at Mass, regardless of sexual orientation or gender identity. That shift happened because of Francis. Beyond college campuses, Francis's influence extended to Catholic parishes across America. While some maintained traditional approaches, others developed innovative ministries designed to welcome LGBTQIA+ Catholics and their families. At Old St. Patrick's Church in Chicago, a ministry called Gay Plus Forum emerged to provide community and spiritual support for LGBTQIA+ Catholics. "We're not challenging church teaching," explains the ministry's coordinator. "We're creating a space where people can bring their whole selves to their faith journey." Pope Francis inspired us to focus on accompaniment rather than judgment. Similar initiatives sprouted in parishes across the country, from St. Ignatius Parish in San Francisco to St. Paul the Apostle in New York City. These ministries typically emphasized community building, spiritual formation, and service, avoiding explicit challenges to church teaching while creating space for LGBTQIA+ Catholics to fully participate in parish life. For older LGBTQIA+ Catholics who had lived through decades of more hostile church rhetoric, Francis's papacy represented a particularly poignant shift. Many had maintained their faith despite feeling unwelcome, often practicing privately or finding accepting communities outside official church structures. "I left the church in the 1980s after a priest told me my relationship was intrinsically disordered," recalls Richard, a gay Catholic in his 70s from Philadelphia. "I never stopped being Catholic in my heart, but I couldn't bear the rejection." When Francis became Pope and started speaking about respect and dignity, I cautiously returned to Mass. Now I'm a regular at my parish, and while not everyone agrees with my life choices, I feel welcome as a person. That's Francis's legacy for me. He brought me home. Stories like Richard's highlight a crucial aspect of Francis's approach: his emphasis on the church as a field hospital for the wounded rather than a fortress of doctrinal purity. By prioritizing pastoral care over ideological conformity, he created space for LGBTQIA+ Catholics to reconnect with their spiritual heritage without feeling they had to deny their authentic selves. This reconnection often took the form of rediscovering Catholic traditions and practices that resonated with LGBTQIA+ experiences. Many found in the lives of the saints examples of diverse gender expressions and intimate same-sex friendships. Others discovered in Catholic social teaching a framework for understanding their struggles for dignity and inclusion as part of a broader movement for justice. "Francis helped me see that being gay and Catholic isn't a contradiction," explains Miguel, a young gay Catholic from Texas. "His emphasis on mercy and inclusion helped me reconnect with the richness of Catholic tradition. I found spiritual nourishment in the mystical writings of saints like Teresa of Avila and John of the Cross, who speak of God's love in ways that transcend conventional categories." This rediscovery of Catholic spiritual resources represented a significant shift from previous decades, when many LGBTQIA+ Catholics felt they had to choose between their faith and their identity. By creating space for a more integrated approach, Francis enabled LGBTQIA+ Catholics to draw on their tradition's spiritual wisdom while bringing their full selves to their faith journey. Perhaps most significantly, Francis's approach created new possibilities for dialogue across the often polarized landscape of American Catholicism. By emphasizing that all Catholics, regardless of their views on sexuality, are called to treat LGBTQIA+ individuals with respect and compassion, he established a baseline of human dignity that transcended ideological divisions. "Francis didn't make everyone agree," observes Father James Martin, "but he made it much harder for Catholics to demonize LGBTQ people or treat them as enemies. He reminded us that before any theological discussion, we're talking about our brothers and sisters in Christ." This shift in tone created space for more nuanced conversations in parishes, schools, and families across America. While deep disagreements about sexuality and gender remained, Francis's emphasis on encounter and dialogue offered a path forward that didn't require either side to abandon their convictions. As we reflect on Pope Francis's legacy for LGBTQIA+ Catholics in America, we're confronted with a profound paradox. Without changing the Church's fundamental doctrine on sexuality and marriage, Francis nevertheless revolutionized how the Church engages with LGBTQIA+ individuals and communities. His revolution was not one of dogma, but of pastoral approach, a shift from judgment to accompaniment, from exclusion to invitation, from condemnation to conversation. This revolution is perhaps best captured in the story of Juan Carlos Cruz, a gay Chilean survivor of clergy sexual abuse who met privately with Francis in 2018. After their meeting, Cruz reported that Francis told him, "God made you this way and loves you this way, and it doesn't matter to me. The Pope loves you this way and you should be happy with who you are." These words, "God made you this way," represent a radical departure from previous approaches that often characterized homosexuality as a disorder or a cross to bear. By suggesting that LGBTQIA+ identities might be part of God's creative plan rather than a deviation from it, Francis opened new theological possibilities for LGBTQIA+ Catholics seeking to reconcile their faith and identity. For American Catholics across the spectrum, Francis' approach offered a way forward that transcended the culture wars that had dominated discussions of sexuality for decades. Rather than seeing LGBTQIA+ issues primarily as battlegrounds in a broader ideological conflict, Francis invited Catholics to encounter LGBTQIA+ individuals as people first, children of God, deserving of respect, compassion, and sensitive accompaniment. This shift in perspective had profound implications for how Catholic communities across America engaged with LGBTQIA+ individuals and issues. While some parishes and dioceses embraced Francis's approach more fully than others, his papacy undeniably created more space for LGBTQIA+ Catholics to participate in church life without hiding or denying their identities. The stories we've explored today, from Michael Sennett's Vatican meeting to Sister Jeanine Gramick's papal validation, from parish blessing ceremonies to reconciled family relationships, all testify to the transformative power of Francis' approach. They represent not isolated incidents, but examples of a broader shift in Catholic culture that has touched countless lives across America. Yet as we mourn Francis' passing, we must also acknowledge that his revolution remains incomplete and contested. In many American dioceses, LGBTQIA+ Catholics still face exclusion and marginalization. Some bishops have explicitly rejected aspects of Francis's approach, particularly regarding blessings for same-sex couples. The patchwork of practices across American Catholicism means that LGBTQIA+ Catholics' experiences vary dramatically depending on where they live and worship. This uneven implementation reflects the reality that Francis chose to lead through example and invitation rather than mandate. By emphasizing synodality, a collaborative, consultative approach to church governance, he created space for diverse local responses to LGBTQIA+ issues rather than imposing uniform policies from Rome. For LGBTQIA+ Catholics, this approach brought both opportunities and challenges. On one hand, it created openings for more inclusive practices in receptive communities. On the other hand, it meant that progress was uneven and sometimes frustratingly slow, particularly in more conservative regions. As one gay Catholic from a rural diocese reflected, "Francis gave me hope that things could change, but that change hasn't really reached my parish yet. I still don't feel safe being out at church, but knowing the Pope would accept me helps me hold on to my faith, even when my local church doesn't seem ready." This tension between hope and frustration, between revolutionary vision and incomplete implementation, defines Francis's legacy for LGBTQIA+ Catholics in America. His papacy represented a decisive shift toward greater inclusion and respect, but the full realization of that vision remains a work in progress, a journey that will continue beyond his lifetime. As we look to the future, the question that looms largest is whether Francis's approach will endure under his successor. Will the next pope continue this revolution of tenderness, or will the Church return to a more rigid, rule-focused approach to LGBTQIA+ issues? The answer will depend not only on who is elected as the next pope, but also on how deeply Francis's vision has taken root in Catholic communities across America and around the world. The seeds he planted, of respect, accompaniment, and pastoral sensitivity, have already begun to bear fruit in parishes, schools, and families. These changes at the grassroots level may prove more enduring than any papal pronouncement. For LGBTQIA+ Catholics navigating this uncertain future, Francis's legacy offers both inspiration and practical guidance. His emphasis on conscience, dignity, and God's unconditional love provides a theological framework for continuing the journey of faith regardless of institutional developments. His example of bridge building and dialogue offers a model for engaging with Catholics across the ideological spectrum. Most importantly, perhaps, Francis's papacy demonstrated that change is possible within the Catholic tradition, not through rupture or revolution, but through a return to the gospel's core message of mercy and inclusion. By emphasizing that the Church's first duty is to accompany people in their concrete realities rather than to judge them against abstract ideals, Francis reconnected Catholicism with its deepest sources of renewal. This reconnection offers hope not just for LGBTQIA+ Catholics, but for all who seek a church that, in Francis's words, is bruised, hurting, and dirty, because it has been out on the streets rather than unhealthy from being confined and from clinging to its own security. As we conclude our exploration of Francis's revolutionary impact on LGBTQIA+ Catholics in America, we invite you to reflect on your own spiritual journey. Where have you experienced judgment and where have you found acceptance? How might Francis's emphasis on mercy and accompaniment offer healing for wounds you've carried? And how might you contribute to building communities where all people, regardless of sexual orientation or gender identity, can experience God's unconditional love? These questions have no simple answers, but in wrestling with them, we participate in the ongoing revolution that Francis set in motion. A revolution not of doctrine, but of approach. Not of rules, but of relationships, not of judgment, but of love. In his final days, when asked about his legacy, Francis reportedly said he hoped to be remembered simply as a good guy who tried to do good. For countless LGBTQIA+ Catholics across America, who found in his words and actions a renewed sense of belonging in their spiritual home, he was much more than that. He was the Pope who reminded them that before any theological discussion about sexuality or gender, they were first and foremost beloved children of God, worthy of respect, dignity, and tender accompaniment. As one transgender Catholic reflected after meeting Francis, he didn't change the catechism, but he changed how I see myself in relation to God and the Church. He helped me understand that God's love isn't conditional on fitting into neat categories, and that's a revolution that can't be undone, no matter what happens next. In that enduring revolution of love without judgment, Francis's legacy for LGBTQIA+ Catholics will continue to unfold long after his passing, a testament to how one man's commitment to mercy and inclusion could begin to heal wounds centuries in the making and create new possibilities for reconciling faith and identity in the complex landscape of American Catholic life.